All right, welcome everyone. Good to be back. Hope you all are doing well, taking good care of yourselves. Today we are kind of wrapping up the initial scope and getting ready for the immediate scope in the Lam Rim teachings. And so just a quick reminder of that, the stages of the path to enlightenment. There is this sort of linear approach, though in truth it's not always very linear, but there is foundational practices that give rise to next level practices and what they say sort of ultimate practices, but they're all very much intertwined with each other. And what we've been doing for the initial phase here is establishing a very solid foundation, I think, in practice for the initial scope, which is really, traditionally would say that you want a good rebirth. We were kind of talking about having a good death, that you can die in a way that you feel good about, confident, do not waste your life, you've lived it well. And so always leaving some room for those of us meeting us where we're at. Maybe we don't have much commitment or belief in the next life. I think we can all agree upon a death. So that's going to happen. What would it be like to die well, to know that I've lived my life fully, that I have lived and engaged in meaningful life, and along that path in participating in life with these same skills and methods to do that? Well, what we do is we eliminate a lot of suffering right now. We cultivate the causes of well-being, and we purify negativities, and we start watching our mind, start creating these antidotes to afflictive states of mind. So really, this initial phase or initial scope would be what we call, whether it's for the next life, it also eliminates suffering in this life, but it's the foundation of everything else. So they're not small practices, they are the foundation of everything. Without them, nothing else happens in terms of a path. So we've been cultivating this, and at the core of it is virtuous activity. So the causes for our and precious human rebirth is going to be spiritual merit, it's going to be virtuous actions. And so our morning practice, taking a little time to really cultivate a mind that is prepared for the day that awaits us, to nurture it with bodhicitta, prayers and inspiration, some meditation for stability, and an awareness, a cultivation of an awareness of virtue, non-virtue, a mindfulness of our speech, which we've been working on. And in this way, we start cultivating virtue and merit. We stop creating afflictions and harmful karmic imprints. We know what to discard, we know what to accumulate. And in this way, our very life in this lifetime gets significantly better as far as mental and emotional struggles and frustrations, a lot more peace and ease, a lot more resiliency, a lot more inner peace, a lot more well-being, and purpose and meaning. So at the time of our death, there's nothing wasted. We didn't waste any of our life. We used it skillfully, wisely. And then for those of us who are, taking the approach and understanding of multiple lives, then we're set up. We have nothing to worry about time of death. We're going to continue, and we can die with confidence, ease, comfort. We've used our life well. We are continuing the journey of freedom. And if we're still not at a stage in our life where we can really lean into the idea of life beyond this one, at the time of death, we can die with confidence, with well-being, with understanding that we've lived a life well. We didn't waste time. We've lived it fully. And we've really reduced a lot of unnecessary mental and emotional suffering, rumination, pride, jealousy, all those types of things. We've engaged in life. And so all the practices that we've been doing then in setting up with the virtue and the purification in the morning, the stability of mind, the mindfulness, the checking in throughout the day, cultivating skillful activities, wholesome and virtuous, avoiding non-virtue, purifying in the evening, dedicating the merit, all just incredibly important for us to gain realization, engage in deeper practice, have access to teachers and teachings. It's the foundation of everything. You can do all of these other esoteric, fancy practices, and without the virtue, without the foundation, they don't do anything. In terms that it could actually be harmful. Yeah. So, yeah, I just kind of want to check in. I know we're doing the webinar, so can't directly ask you if you are new at the end of this. So we go from 6 to 7 Mountain Time webinar form, and then we end this, and then we go into a discussion group. So we have a half hour where we get to see each other. But I do want to just check in, see if anyone has any questions about their practice before I start to move on to the intermediate scope. So if anyone has any questions that have come up through the practice or anything from the talk, sort of the interview from Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo last week, just you can raise your hand or type in the little question and answer box here. And raise your hand, I can mic you. If you want to type in the Q&A, you can do so. And if you don't have anything come up right away, if it does pop up, yeah, just let me know. So this first scope, and so, just traditionally, small scope, medium scope, big scope, these are the 3 types of motivations one engages in practice with. And it's much, I think, more fitting to have initial scope, intermediate scope, this great scope. Not that one's better than the other, initial, intermediate, great. That sounds a little better than big, medium, and small, or great. Small, medium, and great, yeah. So our motivation is linked to why we engage in practice. At any given time, we might be at one or the other. We might be at just, I want to suffer in this moment too. I really want to free all beings from suffering. We might have that for a moment. Might drift into, I want to attain liberation. Whatever our motivations are, they can vary. And as we engage in the path, they can, strengthen, deepen, and propel us forward. So the important thing is to know your motivation and know that it's okay. It's okay to just not want to suffer right now. It's okay to be curious about a path. It's okay to engage in teachings and not be really certain, where you're at in the whole journey of it all. And that motivation is a curiosity and interest. So just being aware of it is helpful. And then these teachings all the way in the path, certain teachings relate more specifically to that type of motivation. So to die well, to live a virtuous life, to really be mindful and aware of the causes of mental and emotional suffering and the real cause of inner peace and well-being. And know ultimately they're going to lie within the karmic realm of virtue or non-virtue, wholesome or non-wholesome. And with that conviction, we've gone through all that, to engage in our lives in that way. So let's say we've got a good practice now. Now we're going to take a look at the motivation of an intermediate scope and think, wow, okay, I'm starting to see I have some habits and tendencies. I have sometimes compulsive behaviors and compulsive thoughts, and I do things that I regret, and I will often feel like I'm powerless to not, act on a habit. Even say, I can't change that habit. Well, we may notice then we're kind of a prisoner, right? Kind of a prisoner. My thoughts and habits, and what we're saying is, our afflictive states, kleshas is the technical term, afflictive mental states, afflictive in the sense that they are taking us away from well-being, and karma, the karma that's ripening, and I'm a prisoner of it. So samsara ultimately is the experience we're having as a result of afflictions and karma. And that's how we experience the world that we live in, is through that lens of affliction and karma. So the nirvana, the liberation, the freedom of samsara, it's not some other place. It's just an experience free of those afflictions and karma. An experience totally liberated of those. In which case this will not look like this, and we wouldn't have mental afflictions and be free of this wheel of karmic imprints, and rebirth, and all that. So we might kind of notice, well, I'm tired of that. I'd like to be free of that. And then we engage in the path of liberation. So the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, that's core to everything. This would be where we come into the Four Noble Truths, the cornerstone teaching of the Buddha that taught the path of liberation, the path to nirvana. Well, okay, let me looking at this. Let me be free of all this mental, emotional suffering, afflictive mental states, cycles of rebirth. And we have this motivation to achieve nirvana. So with that in mind, that would be this motivation for these specific set of teachings, which are the teachings to nirvana. And so in the Four Noble Truths, we always begin with the truth of suffering, and we have the cause suffering, cessation of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. And so let's begin with mental, emotional, physical, all forms of suffering that we can know and experience. We may notice that our lives are filled with challenges, stress, worry, fears. We may notice that we have times where we don't feel bad at all, we're quite joyful. And then we may notice that changes. We may notice that things in our lives that brought us joy don't anymore. And things that used to be a struggle are not so difficult now. And so there's this ongoing changing way of interacting in the world, but regardless of whether I'm feeling joyful in a given moment or struggling in a given moment, there's some things pretty constant. A, all that's going to change. B, this body's getting older. I'm going to be sick sometimes. Ultimately, I'll die. So a lot of times this is presented very clearly by the Buddha, the birth, aging, sickness, death. That is this wheel we're stuck in, and the very nature of the experience of samsara. That is what people will call suffering. So dukkha is the word that is used, and it gets translated to suffering. And if you've been to, I'm sure a lot of Buddhist teachings, you'll hear people say constantly, that's not a very good translation, suffering. Not a very good word. It doesn't really capture dukkha. And so a lot of people try to use other words that might capture it a little bit better. Like Tenzin Paul, dis-ease, right? We're not at ease. Like sukha, which is the opposite of it, a very peaceful, blissful ease. Dukkha is the opposite, a dis-ease. And So that's one way. Some people translate dissatisfaction. It's another one. And so if we look at our lives, we're going to find that our life is filled with, struggles, worries, fears, stresses, dissatisfactions, dis-ease, times of just, I'm not particularly suffering, but, not necessarily at ease. And I'm going to find times where I am not aware of any suffering whatsoever. I'm enjoying life. Things are good, joyful, fulfilling. And so that's where suffering's not going to fit very well in, this explanation, because the types of suffering that we're going to cover, and we'll cover all three, well, it's also going to include this understanding that even my joyful moments will come and go. And that can be quite a struggle. So a fuller understanding of the truth of dukkha is going to be caught up in our third type of suffering, which I'll get to. So 3 types of suffering. And so sometimes as we go through these, sometimes it may seem, oh, I've heard this before, or it's new to me. When we hear Dharma, when we listen to Dharma, how's this apply? Let's check it out. Let's bring a curious mind, whether I've heard it a lot of times. If I'm new, you're probably already curious, interested. And discerning, is that true? Is it adding up? Does that resonate with me? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? So listening to Dharma teachings, listening to these Four Noble Truths, whether we've heard them many times or first time or somewhere in between, so important to bring a clear mind, a discerning mind, right? So we talk about an open mind that is open to explore, but discerning, right? Not just taking on anything. Okay, does this apply? Does it add up? Does it resonate? And so, so as we unpack these 3 types of suffering, the first truth here, let's explore it a little bit. Let's see if that adds up. Does it make sense? Does it not? So the first one is, I think everyone can resonate with, understand. The first form of suffering is actual physical and mental and emotional suffering. So we know that our life's full of that, right? We've had pains in our bodies, we've been ill, we've had relationships, and we've lost people, we've had stress, and we've had worry, we've had fear. We know what it is like to suffer mentally, emotionally, physically. And that's part of an experience. It's not limited to humans, animals, suffer. Pain is part of it. And so this is something I think we can look at, and but it's just very clear. The world is full of this, the very nature of our existence full of this. And as interesting as that may sound, like, oh yeah, of course, that's obvious. It's full of suffering. Don't we think sometimes it shouldn't be, though, right? And therein lies an interesting catch, because the world is full of this, the very nature of it. Our bodies are going to age, we're going to die, we're going to have struggles. We're also going to have joy. We're going to have incredible relationships. We're going to have meaningful experiences. And there's this, sometimes people actually say, without suffering, I would know joy. And I'm not entirely sure that's true, but it certainly leads to one or the other, right? If I have suffering and I relieve that suffering, I have a relief, immediately I feel better. There's a sense of being well. And I can sometimes have a great deal of joy as a result of some of the adversity I've overcome and looking at the life well lived and so forth. So that there's a contrast. But don't we, when we have the good times and I'm not suffering mentally or emotionally in a very clear way, very identifiable way, don't I sometimes think, well, this is how it ought to be? This is how it should be. And then when something happens, there's some resistance there. Shouldn't happen to me. That's not fair. It's not right. Why me? Why not me? Am I somehow immune to what everyone else in the world goes through? So not a quick thing to rush through on this first form. And we can talk about it and go, oh, yeah, I totally get that. But do I get that really? Or do I think that I shouldn't suffer? And then isn't there a lot more suffering thinking that I shouldn't suffer? Or worrying that I might suffer? Stress and suffer. Matter of fact, one of the chief causes of mental emotional suffering is thinking that we shouldn't experience mental emotional suffering. And that's, thinking I shouldn't is different than not wanting to. Very appropriate to not want to suffer, and very appropriate to take steps to not suffer. Very appropriate. Healthy. Well, but it's very different than the belief that I shouldn't suffer. And then when challenges come, there's a resistance to it, and therein lies an incredible amount of suffering. One way of looking at this is the saying, right? Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And in that particular statement, what they're saying is, yeah, it's inevitable. I'm going to have some pain. I mean, things are not going to go my way. I'm going to have injuries. Things are going to happen. Pain, suffering is the resistance to the pain or the situation. And that's a lot worse than the actual pain. So I can endure difficult, painful moments and experiences without having to add on an incredible amount of suffering, ruminating on how it shouldn't have happened and how wrong it is and how it shouldn't have happened to me and what's right, what's not right, and just not accepting it. A lot of mental emotional suffering arises there. A lot more than we need to do, rather than just experience painful or difficult moments. So this first suffering, which I know we all get intellectually, encourage you to look a little more deeply at it and notice that these inevitable moments that happen, and life's full, and we have hospitals, first responders, and we've got counselors and therapists, mental health professionals. Life is going to have its moments. It's the very nature of our experience, and nobody's immune. Nobody. There's no one you'll meet that is free of mental emotional suffering, physical ailments and problems, what we call bad luck, unfortunate circumstances. And yet sometimes we'll think we are. Like if I can just arrange things just so, man, I'll have it made, have a good life, be healthy, live long, have the right kind of friends, be happy. And we'll try to arrange a world like that. There's a lot of suffering behind that. Rather than cars break down, okay, let's see if I can get it fixed. Busted my leg, all right, let's see if I can get to a doctor. Have an illness, understand that's part of the experience. Let's make sure I live while I'm living. We all have a terminal illness. It's called life. Sometimes we forget that. It's an interesting thing that people share. So-and-so's got terminal illness. Yeah, we all do. So let's live while we have it, while we have a life. Rather than think we shouldn't die, let's live while we've got a life. And let's not waste a lot of mental and emotional suffering around events that have already happened. No need to carry them with us for years. Resentment from 5 years ago. Why would that still hurt me today? The only place it exists is my mind. But somewhere I think it shouldn't have happened to me. So right here, even before we go any further whatsoever, if we start to understand the nature of existence, the nature of the experience that we're having, well, we can cut out a lot of mental, emotional suffering by accepting life on life's terms, accepting the experience of samsara as samsara, and it's the very nature of it. But in its very nature is always offering me an opportunity for awakening, an opportunity for understanding, an opportunity for connection, an opportunity for meaning, an opportunity for purpose. While I am here in a rare, precious human birth, favorable to Dharma practice. There's a lot we can do with that, which basically rephrases choosing to live in reality. There's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There's some methods and teachings around mindfulness and different things. And one phrase, whether it's Buddhist teachings or other teachings or more modern mindfulness, radical acceptance, right? To practice radical acceptance. And it's a great term because it's radical that we accept reality. It's a radical shift to just start living reality, which I often think it doesn't sound that radical, right? Let's just live in reality. Why would that be radical? Because we're not used to it. It's totally antithetical to maybe the way we perceive the world and experiences. To accept that we are in samsara, that things happen, and that everything that happens is happening for multiple causes and conditions. I'm not the center of the universe. Big thing to accept. Radical acceptance right there. I'm not the center of the universe. This wasn't all planned just for me. And that everything that's happening in this experience is an opportunity for me to grow, learn, gain insight, bring meaning and purpose to life. Yeah, that's a whole different way of engaging the world. Radically accepting the things as they happen and immediately cutting off that whole construct of how it shouldn't have happened. Which is different from not liking that it happened. I can totally accept a situation, not approve of it or like it. But it's it's what happened. So what do I do with it? So as you can see, I think so often in teachings, just whether it's Buddhism or anything else, the way we learn in Western culture, and I was a school teacher, still have a teaching credential, there's so much emphasis on gaining information, learning things. I mean, how many books do we have on a shelf? How many things have we read? Some of us went to college, took all these courses. What did you remember at the end of them about all those books we read? in order to really progress in a path of understanding and wisdom, it's to bring, as I mentioned, that curious mind, that discerning mind, an attentive mind to things again and again, to go slowly, to apply these three wisdoms: the first wisdom of hearing the teaching, the second wisdom of analytical wisdom, right? Really contemplating the teaching. Does that add up? Does it make sense? Is it true? What about this? What about that? And out of that, we're born a different kind of understanding and realization. And then we meditate on that realization. And so taking some real time rather than rushing through a text or just getting a lot of information. Taking some time to notice the truth of the first. We're still in the first of the three types of suffering. And I'll tell you what, if we get this, life is so much more simple. And we'll eliminate a lot of suffering right here, right now, without any deeper, deeper is not a good word. This is about as deep as it gets, but without all that other stuff, just if I actually understood that samsara is rife with, these types of sufferings, and that naturally I'll experience them as well. How would my life be different if I knew this truth? And so taking some time to really work with that, notice anytime you have mental, emotional suffering, anytime, is it somehow related to the thought that this should not happen to me, or that's not how it should be? So we can cut right through that. That's the way it is. And there were causes for it. So it's not very rational to say it shouldn't have happened. Much more rational to say, I didn't like that it happened. Fair point. The second form of suffering. See, I know we're already getting down to 9 minutes. We'll see. The second form of suffering is suffering of change. And this one is a little more subtle because the things that bring us joy can change to the things that bring about suffering. And by the way, that's everything. So everything that we can find some happiness in changes something that can bring suffering. So, whether it's a prized possession, whether it's our relationship, our partner, whether it's the freedom we're seeking, a nice day at the beach, whatever, can change. Food, so forth. The very common one that's always taught is just food, right? And my favorite food, you eat that every day. Not bring you the joy it once did. Matter of fact, you'd be like, oh, not again. Eat too much of a good thing could get indigestion. Eat, I could actually, one of the real common, just proofs they put in that, a delicious meal can't provide you the happiness. It's not the source of it. They just, the analogy is, if you eat your first portion, your second portion, you keep eating it, well, it actually becomes quite painful. It's not so delicious anymore. Also, if you're sick, and if it's known to be a delicious experience, it's not. So things that, and then if we don't have our favorite meal and we're expecting it, a lot of suffering. All these things, whether we lose it, that's this thing. But, even more tangibly in other ways, we can get pretty happy about a new job. Got a new job, finally got a new job. And then that job will have some headaches and some struggles. And you might catch yourself going, man, I don't want to go to work today. Why can't I get some time off? Man, very different from my first day at the new job I've worked for my whole life. And then, man, do I have to go to work today? Relationships, best relationships in the world. Don't they also have their struggles and their challenges? And even when they're great, don't we struggle when our partner's injured or comes to harm? Do we struggle? There's just the suffering of change, the change of our cities, the way we live. A lot of people pine for the old days, how it used to be. Suffering of change. When I live in a smaller town and new developments, people sometimes get pretty fired up about, don't want it to change. Don't want to block my view of the mountain or have this neighbor, whatever. I don't want things to change. And just that is suffering, right? We don't want things to change. And everything changes. And the things that I try to surround myself to give me the joy, well, that's going to create a lot of suffering too around attachment and of course the inevitable pain that comes along with change of those things. So there again lies a whole nother way to eliminate a lot of suffering. Recognize that things change, things are impermanent, everything's impermanent, everything's changing all the time. It's true or it's not. And us trying to make things permanent that are not permanent. And it's not only futile, it creates a lot of mental, emotional suffering, stress, worry, fear, anxiety, discomfort, even anger and frustration. People are not the way they used to be. So all this sounds a little bit pessimistic. And that's the main thing that I find, really fascinates me. Was, I'm trying to remember what you said. Yeah, Buddhism, that's just too much suffering. And so, the Buddha led with that. And, a lot of people was like, I want to do lots. I just want to join the bliss. Well, therein lies the problem. The people who actually have an understanding of types of suffering, causes of suffering, don't suffer very much. There's a lot more joy, a lot more happiness, and a lot more freedom. Because we're not caught up in the delusion that it needs to be different than it is. And we're actually understand where the true source of joy and happiness comes from, which is not those events and things and people. Those are contributing factors. And don't want to take away from that. It's good to get together with good friends and family, do things, dance a little bit, dance, have some joy. But if I sit there and think, want to try to not think about or avoid suffering, wow, I'm going to suffer a lot more. So as we talk about it, it's really understanding, and we won't quite get to the third one. It's much more subtle point, but I think these first two are important for us. And I'm hoping that we can become aware of them in our daily practice. So we'll be focusing a little bit on noticing resistance to suffering, noticing acceptance and its powerful presence in our life. And when we bring acceptance, how it can transform a moment. And by the way, acceptance, I said already, doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean I approve it. Acceptance has nothing to do with approval. It's merely, okay, this has happened now. And now what do we do?
So